Welcome back to Switched to Linux. Well, today we want to talk a little bit about Linux Mint and 32-bit. This is a question that came up, especially in light of a few weeks back when Ubuntu had the 32-bit snafu. Of course, they're trying to be like the big boys and big girls, and Microsoft tried to do away with Win32, and it didn't really work out too well for them. Mac did successfully drop it because not a lot of people use Mac. And the way Mac works is quite a bit different. And so Ubuntu is like, hey, let's just drop 32-bit. But the problem is 32-bit is used for a lot of features that people on Linux use. This is a completely different thing than running a 32-bit operating system. So let's go ahead and talk about that really quick, and then we'll talk about what the Ubuntu issue was and what we're talking about here with Linux Mint in light of this. Now, first, you have to consider what is the difference between the 32-bit and the 64-bit operating system. This is based on the architecture of your processor. So your processor can either run a 32-bit or a 64-bit, or there's ARM, and there's other processor codes and feeds out there as well. What a lot of your distributions has done is drop the 32-bit processor architecture, meaning that the system would only run 64-bit operating system. This is not a huge deal because 32-bit processors, other than a few weird and odd ARMY type things, and actually there's been a few processors that are still hitting the market now that are 64-bit processors with a 32-bit bootloader for some reason. Somebody can explain to me a good reason why. I'd appreciate it. But I've seen those as recently as a couple years ago. So a lot of lower end things and small, more handheld type things. But the reality is most of your computers are entirely running 64-bit operating systems at this point in time. There's not a lot of reason to keep a lot of 32-bit operating systems floating around. Now, as long as the background code base is available, a 64-bit operating system can run 32-bit applications. That's what the Ubuntu snafu was about, is they wanted to remove the things that allowed Ubuntu and Ubuntu-based distros by default they wanted to remove the ability to run 32-bit applications. The reason this caused a big snafu is a couple of things that people really use in the Linux community is gaming and Wine for running some Windows applications. Wine uses the 32-bit library extensively, and Wine came out basically saying, yeah, we're just going to drop Ubuntu support, which is a big deal, and that means a lot of people would have jumped ship from Ubuntu. Steam, though, came out and did the very same thing. So Steam comes out with the exact same thing, saying, hey, this is what we're doing, and we're dropping it. We're dropping Ubuntu support if they're going to drop the 32-bit libraries, because a lot of these games still need those 32-bit libraries to run properly. Now, all of this snafu caused Ubuntu to reverse its decision. So while they dropped 32-bit operating systems a long time ago, which is not a huge deal, they did decide that they are going to maintain a 32-bit application system so that you can still run those 32-bit applications, so that Steam and Wine will continue to work. So that's what that snafu was about, and that decision was completely reversed. So that is completely different than dropping a 32-bit operating system. Now, in light of all of this, why I wanted to bring this up is in the most recent blog post, the Linux Mint team did announce that 32-bit support is going to be dropped. So because Canonical has dropped 32-bit support for the Ubuntu 2004, that means the future of Linux Mint 20 will only be released in 64-bit. So 19X is already available in 32-bit and can continue to still be used until 2023. Most people are happy with this, and dropping 32-bit releases makes sense in 2020. Okay, many questions raised about multi-arch support. Steam, Wine, and other popular applications used in Linux Mint 64 cannot work properly without 32-bit libraries. This is the part that Ubuntu was about. Canonical addressed these, and this will not be an issue. So that is something that, since that information came out, there's no issue with these moving forward. Now, I have a personal opinion and a personal take on this. I think that Linux Mint probably is keen to keep that. If Ubuntu kept it, Linux Mint would have kept it. Since they didn't, they aren't. But I have a sneaky suspicion that my prediction is when Linux Mint Debian Edition comes out, we will probably still see a 32-bit edition of that. And the reason is 32-bit is still available on Buster, Debian 10, which just came out. So since Linux Mint Debian Edition is based on Buster Linux Mint Debian Edition presently, version 3 is based on 9, which is Stretch. That has a 64 and a 32-bit distribution. My prediction is we're going to see that maintained. So if that is the case and that is true, if you're still running and still need to run a 32-bit operating system, Linux Mint Debian Edition might be the option to look at going forward. Again, that's just a prediction, and I've been wrong about my tech predictions before, but because Debian is still being released in 32-bit and in 64-bit, in addition to several other versions, we are probably going to see that one retained unless they decide that, hey, there's really no real reason to keep it. But I'm not completely sure I see that that is happening. So that's just my brief prediction about Linux Mint and 32 and a little bit from their blog. So brief summary, as of Linux Mint 20, there will not be a 32-bit architecture for your operating system because the next Ubuntu codebase has dropped it. You are still going to have the multi-arch ability, so you will be able to do Steam, you will be able to do Wine. Anything that still requires 32-bit libraries will still function. And my prediction is when we see the next Linux Mint Debian Edition, it probably still will have a 32-bit, but that is yet to be seen, and I haven't seen anybody talking about that as of yet. So with that being said, let us know your thoughts about all this in the comments down below. Don't forget you can help support the channel by having a look at the links that are in the description, including the store link at shop.switchedtolinux.com. Have a look at Patreon, patreon.com/TomM, and thinklifemedia.com, which is my own personal homebrewed support center as well. And we do have several affiliate links, which are also in the description as well. So thanks for coming along, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.